Hi and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining Inventory Base Academy webinar. I'm Sian from Inventory Base Academy, and today we are going to be talking about levelling up property reports and what the future holds for the service providers. But before we get into that, I would like to welcome our panel. We have Ben Shaw representing Trust Inventory. Welcome, Ben. We've got Mark Lazarus from Storm Inventories. Welcome, Mark. Melissa Guthrie-Noyce from MGN Inventories. Hello, Melissa. My partner in crime for our podcast on the inventory professional. We've got Charlie Saunders from Assist Inventories. Welcome, Charlie. And Emily Joyce from AJPS in place of Anthony, who unfortunately couldn't join us today. So where is he, Emily? What's he doing?
He's in Australia.
Oh, good reason.
I believe he's actually at the theatre right now.
Probably,
no,
is he?
Yeah, it's the evening there. What can I say?
Oh, right. Okay. I'll have to give him that. I bet it's a lot nicer and a lot warmer out there than it is here at the moment.
I think it's a little bit warmer, yeah.
Right. So today's webinar, I thought it would be a great idea to kind of start bringing us service providers, inventory clerks, however we want to be called together, because we all talk a lot, and I know I talk a lot to you guys in one capacity or another, more in some respects. And Emily, we were chatting for quite a long time the other day, which was, I know, we do like a chat. And I just thought it'd be really nice to kind of get us together and actually showcase the industry that actually we're here. You know, we're not the kind of like report fairies who just turn up with keys and all of a sudden you don't see us and there's a report, you know, it just magically appears. And that we've got a lot to say, we've got a lot of skills. We bring a lot to the table, and I thought it'd be great for us to kind of start these kind of panels, start discussing what's going on in the rental sector, and also how that affects us both in our own service and how we also going to support our own clients, like your landlords, your agents, and your tenants. So a little bit of housekeeping. The webinar is due to be around about 60 minutes, and we'll try not to go over that. It is being recorded and it will be available on demand via the Zoom link, and it will also go onto YouTube, and it will also be converted into a podcast. So hopefully there's plenty of platforms there for everybody to get engaged and talk and have a good listening as to what illustrious panels have got to say about what's going on in the industry at the moment. So I thought it'd be a really good way to start off with talking about three key subjects. So we're going to look at sustainability in the letting sector, what the impacts and options are, the effects of levelling up on the white paper, the repeal of Section 21, and what that means for the service industry. And also look at contracts and SLAs, because they're a big talking subject, certainly for me and certainly for a lot of other people I've been speaking to. And I want to find out, are they a realistic option, or do we just need, as inventory providers and clerks, as professionals, to act more like a service business to affect the change that we want to see from our own clients? So sustainability in letting sector. So what I'm talking about is EPCs, the fact that the government is looking to get properties up to a grade C, and want to know, for all you guys on the panel and also everybody that is listening, if you've got any questions, please do put that in the questions box. What is this doing to housing stock? Are landlords actually going to comply? And what improvements will this actually help, or will it leave the sector, in a bit of dire straits, and what impact will going to be on these services? Charlie, if I may, can I start with you, because I know you've done a bit of work around this particular subject.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, we have indeed. So the white paper is mainly Zoe's. She spent so much time on this, which has given us some great, valuable information. And as you said, it's got to be up to a minimum of C. The first thing, in my opinion, is that it's just another piece of red tape for the landlords. They're just getting bombarded by it so much over the recent years, which has caused a few of them to leave the market. I think a lot of agents think that more landlords will leave the market. The more red tape that comes in, this is just another thing. It's just another expense for landlords, making it less profitable for them to be landlords. However, the white paper seems to suggest that any landlords that were leaving the market already have. So I think the ones that are there now are, they're there to stay.
They're committed, you think, to longer term?
I think so. So I think, if they're committed to longer term, they're normally up to date with all their regulations, normally got a few properties. So they should, I think, put the work in to get it up to a C broadly.
Okay, what does everybody else think? I mean, we're all different parts of the country. Are we seeing landlords kind of engaging with the process and getting on with the works that needs to be done? What are we feeling about it all?
I mean, I think it's great in principle. Sorry. Yeah, I do think it's great.
Go next, Ben.
Obviously, we want the standards to increase. But again, I mean, like Charlie's saying with the red tape, funnily enough, I met a private landlord the other day, multi-properties, and he was a grade D. And the recommendation was that he spent around £6,000 to make it to a C. And when he asked what the benefit of that would be on a yearly basis, they said £84. Now for him, that's not sustainable. There's no point in him doing it. Luckily, in this instance, he realised that the assessor had missed the insulation in the loft. So he got her to go back, and then that changed him to a C. But he said if those parameters change again, then, next year he just won't let it. He'll sell the property. And obviously, if that might be an isolated incident, but if that's happening sort of time and time again, then our stock levels will go down. Because people it's not worth their while to put in that amount of money to raise it. I mean, there needs to be some logic to it, really.
It's interesting that is then, because then if he hadn't challenged the actual rating, then he would have still been in that, would have spent that money, when actually in reality he hasn't been. I mean, are we finding that landlords are challenging these, or are they just accepting the EPC rating that they're just given?
I mean, I think in this instance, he's sort of a bit afraid with everything. And so he properly read the report, and then he realised actually something's been missed. But for maybe an incidental landlord and someone that doesn't know too much about it, if it's went through the lettings agency and they've just been told, look, this is wrong, not wrong, but this needs to be improved on, then maybe they never would have known. And then obviously that is a huge mistake in terms of finances. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you're spending that kind of money out. Ben, you wanted to make a comment.
Sorry, yes. I tend to agree, to be honest with you, that it will take landlords out of the market. I mean, I'm talking here with two hats on, one representing Trust Inventory, and one as I'm a portfolio landlord myself, and I used to work in a estate agency up until about 8 months ago. So I've got a foot in multiple camps, if that makes sense. So maybe a bit of a different perspective, but from an estate agent side, I would say we might see a reduction in the number of landlords for a period of time. That will involve people then selling those properties. You'll have, I guess, a split of first-time buyers buying some of those properties, but then more likely than not, quite a lot of landlords who are portfolio will look to pick up those additional properties, willing to spend that money to improve the EPC rating, because it is a commercial venture for them. It's a numbers game, I guess. So I think very much going back to what Melissa said, you will have two different, in estate agents, so there's two types of landlords. There's professionals, and there's those who inherit granny's property, who I guess sadly somebody's passed away, they've inherited a house, they don't know what to do with it, so they think, oh, we'll rent it, but they don't know any of the ins and outs. And so I guess at that stage, it's whether they pick the right professionals to help them deliver on making it profitable. So the right estate agent, the right inventory clerk, who they put around them is really crucial to whether or not that's a viable option for them. And very much like Charlie said, for some people, it's just not good value for money. If you've got to spend £6,000 to get an £84 a year saving on your energy bills, is that a viable option to keep that property? And the answer is probably not, unless you're looking at it as a long-term business. i.e. a portfolio landlord who's playing a numbers game, who knows that if they hold on to that property for X number of years, it will go up in price, and it will, those investments they make in making it more energy efficient will ultimately affect the price they can sell it for, and potentially buy some maybe smaller units and more of them, or just, you know, downsize that unit in general, make their portfolio more succinct. So I guess I would say, from a personal perspective as a landlord, I'm prepared to make those investments, and I do. I think as inventory professionals, I imagine we've all come across those delightful properties where you think, I wonder if that landlord might have invested a bit more money in this if it wouldn't get a higher rental, or it might get a better caliber of tenant or something like that. I could see a lot of nodding, so I'm assuming everyone's
Yeah.
agreeing with that one. But, you know, I would say as a landlord, I'm prepared to invest that money. And so it might be a short-term dip, but I think long-term, people need to have somewhere to live. Not everybody can afford a mortgage, and so rental has got to be. Well, we know there's not enough capacity in the public sector, so there's got to be private sector. And with private sector, you will have portfolio landlords who will buy up those properties and keep them rented out. It just might take a little while to build back up to the stock levels we've seen previously. But I think if there is a dip, I think it's going to be momentary. I doubt that it will be long term.
No, I think that's a really good point, and that actually kind of brings me to the point of I saw the other day, it was Ben Beadle from National Residential Landlords Association saying in a editorial that I read online, about 270,000 properties needed in the private rental sector to meet demand over the next 10-year period. So it's not that people don't need them. So maybe it's more of a question of, like you said, getting the right people, but also the education side of it. So people can understand exactly what an EPC rating is, what does it mean, query it if it doesn't look right, and at least, like you said, have the right people around them to actually manage that, be the letting agents, ourselves as inventory providers. A lot of us also provide EPCs and other services. So we've got a wealth of information that we can help landlords with. I think the key thing is they need to know that we do have it. There is a resource out there. What about you, Emily? Would you agree with that?
I would, and I think it's really interesting. That it is a business. You have to remember that landlords are making money. They are owning properties that are earning money. These properties they're working properties. Right. And recently, I live in the ULEZ zone in London, the ultra low emission zone, and plenty of people recently have had to upgrade their cars, or they're going to get fined for driving in the ULEZ zone. And I don't disagree that properties should have to come up to a certain mark as well. We're living in a time where we are very concerned about the environment and our emissions that are going out, and properties have to come up to the mark. That said, there are going to be a lot of people that can't afford to make the changes, and it would be beneficial to many if there were loans for people to be able to afford to make these improvements, to get rid of their gas boilers or at least upgrade them. And we see, in London, there's an awful lot of new builds going on. And very few, well, I suppose out in the suburbs, you have more older properties. And you're kind of torn between these, the beautiful housing stock that we have in the UK, of houses that have been here for hundreds, sometimes, of years. It would be criminal to get rid of them all and build these new builds, which obviously work really well. I'm wondering if, as inventory service providers, actually we can assist more. It's not only about training inventory clerks to do EPCs. That's one way of doing it. It's an expensive training, and it's not easy. But we can look at properties and have a look and see whether they've got double glazing, whether they've got insulation, what kind of heating they have, and help landlords to look at areas where they might need to make improvements. Actually, what we do is we list facts. We're not paid to have an opinion about a property, although we probably do. We are paid to list the facts, and we can maybe do that by incorporating that into our reports.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, we've got the vehicles already, Fitness for Human Habitation. You only have to look at that as a way of understanding, especially for decent home standard, because I know in the white paper it said about decent home standard, but it actually hasn't quite qualified what that actually is going to be. But we've got Fitness for Human Habitation that asks about things like, can you vent? Is it warm? Is the property safe, etc. So we can use that as a basis to understand, okay, how good is that quality of stock? Combined with the EPC, have an understanding, not necessarily be trained as an EPC assessor because it is quite a saturated market, but certainly understand the principles. So then when we're looking at it and we're giving that advice and we're filling out that Fitness for Human Habitation risk assessment, we can say, well, look, these are the kind of things you need to look at.
Yeah.
These are the kind of things you need to pay attention to, or at least refer to EPC or challenge the EPC or get more information. So I think we've definitely got a role certainly in with that. And I know what you mean about opinion. Normally, we don't have an opinion on anything, or the whole point of what we do with reports is to remain very impartial. But I think if we look at what, say, for argument's sake, surveyors do, they provide their opinion, but they also provide the facts and everything that goes behind it, and they're offering their service on the basis of their knowledge and their expertise. And I think we've got a wealth of that in this industry that we just do not tap into.
No,
and if we did, we could definitely give a better service. I mean, I don't know if you agree, Mark. I mean, what about your experience in this area?
I think going back to your initial question on sustainability and how that's implemented, and I think Emily's point on the ULEZ is a very interesting one, because I think it demonstrates how important incentives are when looking at behavior change. And you only have to look at where the incentives lie to see what the outcome is going to be. And with the ULEZ, you drive your older van through London, the camera takes a picture and you get fined, and you can't escape it. And that's what's driving people to upgrade their vehicles. It's not that majority of those people are concerned about emissions. It's they don't want to be fined. And a lot of these topics that I think you're going to cover here come down to how is this going to be enforced in reality. And I don't see the necessary infrastructure in place to realistically shift the private rental housing stock to a level C anytime soon. I think 2025 is a totally unrealistic target. You've got millions of houses that don't meet those standards. There's not enough contractors available, even if you wanted to do the work. The costs of the work are going up 20% a year with inflation on materials. I don't see it happening. And I think within 18 months, the government are going to roll that back, and they're going to have to shift those timeframes and find a new way of explaining this to people, because I don't think it's sustainable. The initiative itself is important. I'm not entirely convinced that, changing light bulbs is going to change the global climate issue. I think big industry is really to blame for a lot of the problems we have. And I think the shift of moving responsibility to individuals is a bit of a political one. It's the same thing with like driving electric cars. Yes, it's great, but really it's a tiny proportion of the picture, and it's really big industry that contributes so much to global pollution, and mainly in the industrializing east, where you're getting huge amounts of emissions. So yeah, I don't see it. I don't see the enforcement and the regulation being in place, and I don't see until landlords feel they're going to be fined, or until landlords can't get a mortgage or a buy-to-let mortgage, which I think is one of the things that was hinted at, that potentially you might not be able to get the right type of mortgage for your property if you don't have the right EPC level. If that starts to come into place, and suddenly I think you're going to see landlords waking up and saying, oh, hold on a minute, this is going to affect my yield, this is going to affect my yearly income and profitability, and then you might start seeing a shift. But until then, I just see it as a lot of political appeasement. And I think this has been going on for years. And the decent home stand has been around for 20 years, and Labour introduced it 20 years ago. This rhetoric is not new, and it's been great for social housing sector. It brought standards up over, say, a 10-year period pretty quickly. But there were incentives in place. It was a simple, clear objectives given to the councils, and they had access to funding to achieve it. The private rental sector, again, until they can't rent their properties out, and like one of the speakers said, the unprofessional landlords, the incidental landlords, until they start to struggle to gain yield, I don't see people investing hugely in their properties unless they have to. I think it will remain a reactive dynamic.
Yeah, and certainly I'm seeing that in some of the portfolio that I deal with in my own personal business. There is kind of like, well, okay, we'll wait and see till I get pushed far enough that I have to, that it becomes a problem, then I'll then deal with it at that point. And I did actually speak to an EPC assessor yesterday about the subject, and he was saying that, and agreeing with you, what you're saying about the 2025 agenda, he doesn't think that's going to happen. I think he said realistically you're looking at 2028, maybe 2030, because again, so many properties, especially the old ones, like you said, Emily, are too old. A lot of them will be then excluded, won't have to meet that marker, because there's just no way that they can do that. It just, you couldn't retrofit the properties. They're just not able to be able to get to that sea level. So it's, in a way, what we're kind of like saying is that, yes, we've got the EPC C rating there, we've got the sustainability agenda and trying to, get to a carbon neutral place, but certainly at the moment we're not really seeing landlords worrying overly about it, and also it won't necessarily impact stock, which, taking the actual subject question is, what the impact will then be for us as providers, because obviously if we don't have houses to provide to, then there's no work for us. So we're not really kind of like concerned. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. I think there's always going to be stock. I can't see that I can't see those dynamics changing dramatically. And yeah, I think as inventory providers, we have an opportunity to present data. We're often first in and first out of a property, and that gives us, an advantage over other service providers. We have a privileged position in that sense, and we have an opportunity to take the horse to water.
Mm-hmm.
But in 10 years, I've never had a conversation with an agent on fitness for homes. It's never come up.
No.
It's just not a topic that gets raised. Again, you've got to go back to incentives. There's a misalignment of incentives. So you've got the government on one hand trying to push all these initiatives, but the agent is concerned with making sure that their properties are rented for their landlords. The landlords are making sure the rents are paid. The tenants are making sure that the place is warm and clean and tidy. And the majority of private rental homes are in relatively good condition. And I think it's very easy that the 10%, that perhaps don't meet the standards get a lot of the headlines. And yeah, I'm fully in support of incentivizing those landlords and removing them from the market. But I don't think that's something that we as inventory providers are really going to be able to affect. Yes, we can highlight the reports, but then there's a commercial angle, which is sometimes people don't want the information. They don't want to be told. It's like we could tell a landlord X, Y, and Z is wrong with your property. You should spend £500 here and £200 there, and you should fix this and you should fix that. And I've thought over the years what a great service that would be. And the minute you test it, the minute you speak to people they don't want to know. It's the incentive's not there for people to react, and it's a shame. And I think as forward-thinking business owners, and I'm sure all of us are, we want to be able to do more. We want to add more value. We want to creep up the value chain and not perhaps be seen as these commodified service providers. But without full engagement from the rest of the stakeholders and a shift in culture, it's very, very difficult. And perhaps these initiatives, government-led initiatives, will slowly compound over time. And perhaps, the internet bringing transparency to business broadly and making things a little bit less opaque will encourage agents and landlords to take some of this a bit more seriously. And over time, perhaps we will drag up standards. But I think patience is key.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I think in a way, the effects of levelling up, and going into our second part of the questions that we've got for today, that kind of dovetails quite nicely into that, because one of the ideas of the levelling up paper is, as I said, standardise, bring that decent home standard back up into the forefront, get properties to the right level, get them to EPC C level, and get it into a much fitter and better and proper place, so that, quite rightly, you end up with really good landlords, with really good tenants, with really good homes, and a sustainable service. So that makes a huge amount of sense. So bearing that in mind, with the changes that the Levelling Up paper are recommending, including the ongoing repeal of the Section 21, is that, do you think, going to be affecting us as providers? Is it going to make any difference? And what do we want from our service industry to see put in place in order to, safeguard what's going to happen once that Section 21 actually gets repealed? What's going to go in place of it? What will happen? Will it make any difference at all? Will we find landlords actually looking at our reports even more closely, because they're going to need more evidence in order to actually then say, I need to end this tenancy for this or this reason, because they've taken the no fault eviction out of the equation? What do we think?
I didn't know who was going to speak. I think it's actually, what it will do is make the midterm inventory crucial. A lot of people don't actually use them. A lot of estate, I think they see it as a bit of an expense that they don't need mid-tenancy, and actually they're very quick, they're not expensive, but they are a snapshot of a property at that particular time, and it gives a really good overview of how the property is being treated. We're allowed in, we are independent, and we can just go in and say, it looks like this is the evidence, and I think that is going to be absolutely crucial. I was asked the other day to go into a property, and because the rumor had been that it was being treated appallingly, and I went in and I said, it's immaculate. I don't know what. So
where did that come from then?
Well, I think it came from a disgruntled person. Who I'm not going to go into too much detail about that. But that was, so it meant that I could go in independently and represent the agent, but I could chat to the tenants and see what was going on. We're incredibly useful to because we're generally quite nice people.
Well, and plus also we've got an impartial view, aren't we? We're there to kind of just to find out the facts. We're not there to judge. We're not there to, cast aspersions or anything along those lines. And I think certainly in my own interactions as well is that tenants tend to be much more relaxed with us. They'll talk to us more because they don't feel that there's a bit of a hidden agenda. Because one of the first things I ever say to them, I'm here, I'm impartial, I'm here just to look at this, and this is what I'm doing. Tell me, what you need me to be aware of, and so on and so forth, and build that rapport up. Whereas I think sometimes when it's not us, they think, I can't say anything, or if I say something, where does that go to, and what they're going to react like. And I always feel they're more comfortable when they've got an inventory clerk in their house doing the interims.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can gather huge amounts of information, and I think it's sorry, I'm gonna be quiet.
That's okay.
Somebody else speak.
I mean, Melissa, you do quite a lot of interim inspections. How do you find them?
Yes, I very much agree that I think this will be crucial now. Our reports will be so much more important to do them. We similarly, I sort of explain that I'm there and I'm independent, and that lets the tenants sort of say their piece. What I do find, and I think is quite telling as well, is that a lot of tenants will say, I just need to point this out, point that out, show me the maintenance. But then they are very much like, but I'm fine with it. It's fine. You don't need to push it. I don't want to upset the landlord. And I think with, the no fault eviction previously, a lot of tenants are worried about rocking the boat. They're very worried that if I go back and say, look, this needs to be done, that needs to be done, this hasn't been done for, the last 6 months, they're saying it's outstanding. They're worried that the landlords will serve them notice. So I do see, the benefit in the repeal of protecting them and having longer term tenancies. To touch on the repeal of the Section 21, it struck fear in my heart from a property management background of I mean, I know Ben said he's from a estate agency background before, but the Section 8 process is problematic, to say the least. So that was always kind of accompanied with Section 10, and there are lots of ways that tenants, unscrupulous tenants, knew how to get around it, because Section 8 is saying 2 months in arrears, and they would pay like a tiny amount just so they weren't 2 months in arrears. Then the whole process would have to start again. And these kind of things, I think it's great because it's protecting the tenants, and it's letting them stay in properties longer. Obviously, the knock-on effect of that is that maybe they're not going to be moving so much. So again, that's something that will impact our market. But from the point of view of landlords, I think it's worrying that a lot of them will be scared. And depending on their guidance from agencies, they might be very worried about whether this means they've got a tenant in there forever, what it will mean if they need to try and get back in, what if they, really don't get on with the tenant if there's an arrears situation. I think, there's talk of making the housing tribunal to help with it going through court and things. And it's so important, because unless the Section 8 process changes as it is, I think we will lose landlords from that point of view, because it will be so difficult to get the property back onto the market. But I mean, yes, going back to the inspections, this will be a lifeline for them for that evidence. The inventory is going to be even more important now, as are the checkouts as their basis of evidence. But to have that extra step in between will be so important to them.
Yeah, it would be good if we could actually get it so that it's not a choice of, that it actually should be a mandatory action, i.e. that the whole information chain, like it is when you're doing a tenancy, like with the ASTs, like the right to rent and so on and so forth, that inventories are, and interims and checkouts are part and parcel, so that they are done at regular intervals, rather than, like you said, a kind of like afterthought or bargain basement, because I really don't want to pay. I think, certainly from my own experience, landlords that I've spoken to have said, I don't mind paying as long as it's going to be useful for me, as long as I can use it, as long as it actually adds value. So that, when it comes to the checkout, when it comes to any dispute or anything along those lines, and Section 21 as it stands at the moment, I've got everything that I need, but it needs to do that. So I'm happy to pay for it if it does the job that I want it to do. But I think interims do that. I think maybe the understanding around them isn't as clear. So maybe that's something, certainly from us as a provider, we need to be more clear, talking about it more, selling the benefits, not of getting the report, but of the actual, what the report will do in regards to de-risking some of the situations, or at least highlighting things and getting things like maintenance sorted out. I think sometimes the reports that we do are looked on more as though it's just a report. I always look at it as it's a potential risk mitigation report, and also often it will actually bring the conversation down. It will kind of like demotivate the conversation, because it's all about facts and figures, and then you can then deal with things like maintenance and other kind of issues. I mean, Ben, what about you? Because being a portfolio landlord as you are, I mean, Section 21, how does that feel for you? Does it worry you?
So again, I think it comes down to a couple of different factors, some very interesting things that a lot of people have said. So does Section 21 worry me? No, it doesn't. And again, because I'm a portfolio landlord who isn't looking to sell my properties, they are an investment that I plan to keep long term. I'm quite happy for tenants to stay as long as they're paying their rent. Now, there are lots of mitigations for tenants who don't pay their rent. Obviously, you have, as we said, got the perilous Section 8, which I think Melissa brought up. But a lot of portfolio landlords, if they're really worried, and I play it cautiously, and again, I think it all comes down to, if I'm honest, those who treat it like a business and those who treat it like a pastime. So for me, it's a business, and therefore I want to ensure my income. So I have insurance alongside my my landlord's insurance that covers non-payment of rent for it's normally a 12-month period. Now, obviously, you should even with Section 8 be able to get rid of tenants who aren't paying rent if they've been not paying rent for 12 months. By that point, you should be in that position. So I think there's some amendments that the government's got to really look into. So like Melissa said, this whole paying a small percentage, so they're not quite 2 months in arrears, that shouldn't fly. That should be amended, ideally, alongside. So if it's sort of any proportion of rent that is overdue for more than 2 months, that should be how it's done, rather than it has to be exactly 2 months worth of rent. So I think those kind of legislative changes need to be brought in alongside the repeal of Section 21. But in terms of am I worried as a portfolio landlord about my tenants staying forever? No, I have tenants who've been with me for 8 years. I think they'll stay with me until they pass away, and I'm quite happy with that because they're good tenants. They look after the property, and for me, it's a business. I don't want any void periods, and no landlord wants any void periods. Plus, I'm not paying remarketing. I'm not paying for all the other expenses. Those cheeky estate agents that I used to be have these horrendous charges.
You said that.
But I think that was one of the other things that you mentioned that some of the I think Emily mentioned was and yourself, sorry, was obviously the cost. I appreciate midterm inspections are cheap, but when you have an estate agent who says, I'm going to charge you an inventory make and a checkout, and they don't mention any interim, because they don't want to pay for something that they feel they can do themselves. So I work for quite a large company. I work for the Connells Group, who now owns Countrywide and Sequence, which a lot of people will know the brands, but not necessarily know how big that actually is. It's huge and all across the country. They do all their own midterm inspections, and they only do one a year. Now, I worked at other estate agencies in the past. They do 2 a year. Some would try and do it sort of 3 times a year to sort of have that consistency. But if you start charging landlords money for those sort of interim inspections when you're already paying perhaps quite a hefty management fee, you start to think as a landlord, well, is it worth me paying that management fee? Can I do it myself? And so estate agents who are probably more likely to have a wider sort of portfolio of properties, which I would imagine most of us get our business from, that's probably the reason they're less inclined to take us up on midterm inspections, because, I guess it's a cost to them, ostensibly. They're looking to avoid having those extra outgoings and maximize their own profits. So I'd say that's kind of one of the reasons.
Is there a way of incentivizing them, do you think, from our point of view as providers? Because we know the benefits of them. We know it's not a case about doing them cheaply, it's about doing them right. That's my fault. My view is it shouldn't be about price point. It should be about quality, what it brings to the table, what benefits, and how it de-risks the tenancy, de-risk the issues towards the agent and everything else. So, from us as providers, well, what can we do then to kind of like convince them that actually it's better to have an impartial interim inspection, it's better to pay, not huge amounts of money, and depending on the frequency, I don't think it's actually a particularly big cost, but I think the benefits are huge if it's done properly.
And I think, again, that comes down to the professionalism of the landlord, if I'm honest, because I would highly doubt you're ever going to persuade an estate agent that they should spend money. I just don't. Unless they have to, unless it's absolutely necessary. If they think they can do it themselves, head down to the property, take a few pictures, tell the landlord, yeah, the property is in good condition, or no, it needs some maintenance, which is invariably what quite a lot of the estate agents do. Rather than spend that money, they'll do it themselves, and they'll normally send, the office clerk or something like that. They'll send the person who's not making them any money down there, so that the administrator generally, and it's a quick sort of 5-10 minute job for them. Your professional landlords, I think like myself, who see the value in it, who think actually a professional report is actually very valuable and will make a huge difference to any potential future claims against the deposit, things like that, you know, or does it head things off beforehand? I mean, I've always looked at it very much from a landlord's perspective as a way of avoiding more serious damage to the property. So I'm sure a lot of you will have come across situations where the tenants, I think someone mentioned earlier, the tenant's going, oh no, but don't worry about it. It's fine. I can live with that. It's not a problem. And you try and explain to a tenant that actually it's not necessarily about whether they're happy living in that sort of way. It's actually that door that you're having to slam shut every time you're slamming it, that's pulling the handle off the door. And that's actually going to result in a much bigger bill for the landlord. So I think if I was, you know, when I try and explain to landlords and estate agents what's the benefit of us going in, it's very much like you say, actually they open up a lot more to an independent individual, someone not tied to the landlord or the estate agent, and actually find those problems that maybe have gone missed because the tenant was too worried about saying, oh well, the bathroom flooded and because the kids turned the taps on and it spilt over, the door warped and expanded and now it doesn't close properly. And actually all it probably needed was just a very quick sand down or a bit of shaving at top and bottom to make the door fit again without having to slam the door to close it. And that saves the door from splitting or from the handle coming off, which actually probably results in a much higher bill. Who you then have that unfortunate situation where landlord's still got to replace it no matter what happens. Now, either the money gets back to the landlord at the end of the tenancy because it's considered damage, or it's considered wear and tear. And no matter what happens, the landlord is always going to have, it's never going to be the cost price. It's always going to be a reduced version of that because the door was there for 10 years and, wear and tear and devaluation. So, yeah, I would honestly say that there are lots of ways that it can be explained to landlords and estate agents. It's whether I think it all comes down to whether they're receptive to that and how good we are at explaining the pros and cons, the benefits of it.
Which again comes back down to another comment made earlier on about the education of, isn't it? It's about explaining it, showcasing the benefits, and like I said, de-risking it, and also highlighting a bit what I was getting from what you were just saying is the fact that sometimes tenants get so used to living in a certain way that they cannot become a bit like my son's bedroom, nose blind to the sock smell. They can't, you kind of get so used to it, you just don't see it anymore. So of course, then when you're walking around or whether you're living there, you just don't pick it up. Whereas you or I and Mark and Emily and Charlie and Melissa, we would pick those up because that's what we do. Because we've got that impartial view, we can see those things and see the things that maybe the tenant hasn't seen, or at least see the repercussions and the risks going forward. And I think that's kind of like the benefits of what we do as service providers. We can see those risks, we can understand it, and we can forecast. And by doing that, I think we can then reduce that maintenance bill. We can reduce that issue when it gets back down to the checkout side. And that's kind of like, I think, one of the biggest roles that we've got, apart from obviously the inventory and the checkout. We can really add value in that way. I mean, Charlie, from your point of view, especially with the white paper that you've done and the landlords you've talked to, what's their feeling on interim inspections? Are they bothered? Is it something that they want to get involved in, or is it down to cost?
Yeah, so I have to say, I mean, midterms is something that I've always tried to, I'd say push, but, inform landlords and agents of the importance of it. It was like what I think Ben was saying, in that the whole point is to try and stamp out problems earlier, and the earlier you can stamp them out, then the less it's going to cost the landlord in the long run. Then that comes down really to the whole inventory process as well. Like you said, it's that chain of information. If you've got the inventory and check-in, and then you've got regular midterm inspections, say every 6 months, and the tenants know there's going to be a checkout as well, it kind of shows the tenant that you're professional, or the landlord or the agent is professional, and they want to look after the property. And then it kind of then puts that onto the tenants as well. If the landlord or the agent doesn't really care, then the tenants are not so bothered. But if the tenants know that the agent and the landlord want to look after the property, then the tenants tend to do the same. That's normally the case more on family homes. We also do a lot in London sharers. I used to own a lettings agency. You mentioned to their midterm inspection, they're like, when you come in or panicking, they need to clean, they need to sort the place out. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts. But in the last 10 years of being working in lettings, management, inventories, it's, you know, if they're going to be done, it's normally done by the landlord or the letting agent. Although literally in the last month or so, we have had a couple of agents with large management portfolios that are starting now to talk to us about doing midterms for them. So that's quite interesting. So we'll see how that goes.
I think there's a big push, certainly within, from what I'm understanding, and the different forums and the agents and the landlords I'm speaking to, that you know, they're fast realizing that they need to concentrate on their own revenue generating tasks that will make money for them. And there's a lot of stuff which is, you know, basic admin, doing interim inspections, doing inventories and checkouts, that don't really fall into those kind of categories. They, you know, they provide information, they provide obviously support in regards to deposit and disputes and so on and so forth, but it doesn't bring another property necessarily into their pipeline. So it makes sense for them to concentrate on those and then outsource to us, you know, to people who know what they're doing, who can have that rapport with the tenant, and make it so much easier to get that information, especially like when tenants maybe are not necessarily willing to kind of like engage, or they don't feel they're able to engage, or they're looking, you know, that landlords and agents don't really worry or bother too much about them. So therefore, why should they bother about the property? So, you know, I'm finding that there are more calls for interim inspections, but I think, again, we as providers, we need to kind of keep selling those benefits. And again, my view is sell the benefits and then talk about the pricing part, rather than I'll do it for X amount of money. And then that's the whole conversation. And I think that's, again, goes back down to the whole education side of things. But one of the problems we've also got, and it's our third point in what I wanted to talk today, is the whole issue of contracts and SLAs, is that everything is kind of like done almost like on a willing basis. You know, it's more of a goodwill basis. It's not necessarily done on anything substantial in regards to contracts and SLAs, where it actually pinpoints when you're going to do things, how you're going to do them, to what kind of standard, how many times, and so on and so forth. So is that something, having contracts and SLAs, that would actually help us as an industry to be able to cement all these different processes and get in place all these different reports, including the interim? Or is the goodwill that we've got at the moment working? What do we all think about that?
Do people in general have contracts with agents? You know, do you demand exclusivity? I find that when we try to push that kind of thing, agents tend to just back off. They don't really want to be in a long-term relationship and committed. So ours are, you know, very much on goodwill and our reputation, which is great, but it doesn't give us much security. The other thing is that if reports were standardized to a certain level and we had to include certain things, would that work for all agents and clients? I mean, at the moment, we're able to tailor our reports to their individual needs, and they're often quite different. You know, how they want things presented, who they want liability assigned to, whether they want liability assigning, and would that be taken away? I mean, there's also the level of cleaning. Some cleaning companies do certain things, like clean the freezer, and others don't. And it depends on which agent has used them. So I think if you standardize the whole thing, does it restrict us, or does it make things clearer for us? And this is it,
isn't it? Is it a good idea? Would it actually help, or would it like hinder? But like you said, on the other hand, it gives us less, if we don't have contracts and SLAs, it gives us less standing in regards to, we're always kind of worried, almost like, you know, they might go off somewhere else. It's, you know, it's like a cheating partner, isn't it? You never know whether they're going to still be there at the end of the day. But equally, if we had standardization or we had contracts, then we could employ staff, we could go away from maybe less self-employed, and therefore we'd have be able to train and to a better quality, and also then retain staff and build a bigger business because you had a stable basis. So it's a real kind of like conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
As to what is the best thing to do. I mean, Mark, what do you think? Do you think we should have SLAs contracts, or is it going to restrict us to the point where, you know, actually we won't be able to operate, or we'll all be doing exactly the same thing? So therefore, why do actually we need as many providers as there are?
I think with SLAs, it depends what we're talking about. Like there's the way I see SLAs is more around how we perform and speed of service and consistency of availability, invoicing and things like this. And I think if we started to put SLAs in place in our industry, it would be invalid within days. I mean, the amount of times we go to properties and we can't get access because the keys aren't in the right place and no one's informed from front office to back office, or the tenant has extended, or the landlord's got a contractor in there. And all these issues would invalidate the SLA, like, you know, on both sides. So I think there's a reason they don't exist, really. We have contracts and we have terms and conditions set from the corporate side. And it's more a question of like, this is how we do things. And if you want to work with us, then you have to sign this piece of paper. And then that's it. It's a once a year event. It never gets spoken about. We have no real leverage in terms of shaping that agreement. Sometimes the terms are onerous, but you know they're not going to be implemented, but they're there. And for worst case scenarios, you take a commercial view. And I think, yeah, the panel approach to supplier management from the big guys is probably going to stay for a while, for reasons that Emily alluded to, that they don't want to take on the risk of being in bed with one particular contractor for one particular service, and they'd rather spread their risks across multiple contractors. They'll argue that, you know, what happens if you guys don't survive and you let us down in the middle of the summer and we can't reorganize and find additional resource? I think really it comes down to, you know, price suppression sometimes, and you know, having multiple suppliers competing against each other for the work sort of, you know, means that they have the corporates have a bit more control over pricing. This sort of fake engineered competition.
But one of the bigger issue is, sorry to interrupt, one of the biggest issues, and it's something that we've been talking about on the support hub on our Facebook group with Inventory Based Academy, is the fact that, you know, there's still a big problem about getting paid, to get your invoices paid. And would an SLA make any difference or not? Or, you know, how, you know, and how we manage that, because that's also a big part of that conversation about not having those contracts, not having that standardization in regards to, you know, when things are done, when things are paid. You can have your terms and conditions, but then it's enforcing them, like you said. You're often,
it all comes down to incentives. Like, what are we realistically going to do about it? You know, what are you going to do? Sue your client, you know, because they're late on payment? You're not going to do it. And
exactly.
The payment is, and I'm glad you mentioned it, I think it's my biggest bugbear, and it's what upsets me the most. And I find that the most challenging element emotionally, to have to sort of hold your nerve and not say what you really want to say sometimes, when it comes to chasing. I mean, we have to chase sometimes 10 times for an invoice over like a 6, 7, 8 month period, and it's almost like the cost isn't their cost. You know, it's a pass-through cost. Actually, the landlord is meant to pay us and then we'll pay you, but we messed up somewhere, we didn't hold the money back or whatever it may be. And therefore it's in the vacuum, it's in the sort of it's in this sort of no man's land, the payment. And
in the meantime, you know, we have paid our clerks who have been in.
We're providing interest-free loans, aren't we? Really?
Yeah, and you've given them the product as well. You've given them the report. So
and the amendments,
there's no rush
and the consultation, and the rebooking, and the support. And I think if I could do one thing, you know, it would be to aggregate all of the suppliers and to shift the culture, and to actually say we've had enough, and people need to wake up, and they need to accept that this is no longer acceptable, and that as a group, as suppliers, we're all going to stick to an agreed set of principles around non-payment and late payment, and try and drive change through being more conspicuous about this matter. I think people are scared to bring it up, and they're scared about the impacts of chasing too hard. And on the flip side, you know, that often the corporates are understaffed, or don't have, you know, have part-time accounts people that don't necessarily have a complete, you know, oversight as to exactly why something's gone wrong. And I think until people get together and sit down and say, okay, we have to do something about this as a group, then there won't be a huge amount of change there. And I'm not sure, you know, dropping an SLA here or there, or, you know, it's going to make any difference. Also, these are deep cultural challenges that need to be addressed in a much more sort of intelligent way, in my view. But I think it's ridiculous. I really, really do.
It is, and I think it's something we've all had. Sorry, go on, Emily.
No, I'm just wondering if it's, I know, Sian, you and I have had this conversation where we're sort of treated as the last person on the list. And often we are, you know, we're the last people to get booked.
Yeah, from a
But yet
reporting point of view, definitely.
yeah, so that, you know, it goes sort of landlord, tenant, or the agent, landlord, tenant, you know, and then, oh, we might need an inventory. So we're not treated as important as we probably are. I mean, you know, if it comes down to report disputes and arbitration, we're there. And we're just not treated with any sort of respect. And I don't know if that's because to be an inventory clerk, you don't actually need any sort of qualifications. You don't even need a DBS check, which I find quite shocking.
Yeah,
You're going into people's houses. So there's no government accredited scheme or qualification, or you know, a training thing that you have to pass in order to become an inventory clerk. So are we devaluing what we do by not insisting that there is that kind of thing in place?
I don't think it's so much a question of that. I think that's a natural sort of insecurity that emerges from operating in this industry over a number of years, and I feel that at times. And yes, I think we certainly could improve training and standards, and you know, improve our position in that sense. But I think it's a systems and processes challenge on the other side of the market. And I just think the way organisations that we serve are set up allows this to happen. And not enough attention has been paid on their end to fixing those problems, and they are fixable. And it probably comes down to the expendability of our service. They probably think there's another inventory company. If we fall out with these guys, someone else will do it as well. Yeah. So perhaps that does talk to your point in some sense, but there's no excuse anymore. You know, there's plenty of innovation and products and services out there for our clients to adopt that would mitigate a lot of this. There's PayProp, I think, which are a big payment infrastructure company that are starting to sort of smooth some of the payment flows in our industry. There's a load of fintech on the deposit side of things, which you can see how that's shifting, how money flows through the various stakeholders in a positive way. And I think it's inevitable that you know, once companies realize the benefit of adopting technology to ensure that landlords are held liable for the services that they are approving, you'll see that's when you'll start to see change. And once the big corporates realize, oh, hold on a minute, if I invest in this tech, I might save a couple of bums on seats across our property management administrators department, then suddenly they'll be like, okay, this is actually worthwhile, and then we will benefit as a result. And I think that's coming, but it's slow and it's painful, and I just wish that they would be a bit braver and a bit bolder. And it's professional etiquette. It's not even about, you know, oh, we're inventory clerks, and yes, it's easy to find other inventory clerks. It's not even, it's basic business etiquette. You know, it's just, you know, you pay for what you've agreed to purchase.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's something that has kind of come up loads of times, and I think I've spoken probably to most of you about that at some point or another, in as much as that we are a service and we are a professional service, and we deliver and we provide the reports, and we should be paid, as agreed, on time, and be seen as a professional service. So the part and parcel of this, the last question about SLAs and contracts, so, if SLAs and contracts are not the right route, but we, like you said, we've got this issue with payments, but we've got the fintech there, but it's still slow in coming. What else do we need to do as businesses to be able to affect that change? And one of your comments, Mark, was about banding together, talking together, and like you said, Emily, getting to a point where we actually all singing off the same song sheet. We can still deliver our services the way we do. We can still be, a leader in our own markets and still make, give landlords the kind of service they want. But it's also about the fact that if we have a collective voice, we can then affect that change and get people to look at us in the right kind of way. Because, funny enough, I was writing this yesterday when I sent you all our emails, and I actually thought, maybe that's a little bit too hard, but we're bloody good at what we do. We've got a lot of experience. We've got a lot of professionalism in our industry. We deal sometimes with very, very difficult people, very difficult circumstances and situations, especially when we go into some properties where, it's not really good to be there, from an environmental point of view, or, tenants are stressed or whatever. So we have a multiple of hats that we wear. We do a really good job. And I think it's about time, the industry saw us that, but then I think there is also an onus on us to be able to put that forward. So I think a lot of that is about standardization of our reports, how we deal with issues like you might have said about the being paid, about enforcing those terms and conditions, not just giving them once a year, but reinforcing them all the time, chasing those debts. So even though that we shouldn't have to be doing it, I actually did it yesterday, and I threatened a whole kind of bailiff kind of situation, and lo and behold, I got paid yesterday. I shouldn't have to do that.
At what cost?
Exactly. Loads of admin time, which probably is now kind of outstripped the cost of the report.
And in your head as well, you've like rattled the cage, right? And you're probably thinking, great, I've been paid, but now my relationship has dropped down a couple of notches.
Exactly.
And it's that. Why should we feel like that? And it's that dynamic that I think is what most needs to be targeted.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think that needs to definitely change, and I think a lot of that is about perception. But then we need the right people in front, kind of getting the associations that are there, talking about us in the right way, supporting, guiding agents, getting them to see and utilize our services in the right way. And like you said, that will then hopefully follow through with regards to payment standardization, and the whole information that we provide. Zoe Taylor has just popped on the chat, and she said that, certainly she agrees that suppliers, we should all band together, we should all start talking together. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this panel. One, to showcase, that there is people behind the keys. There are businesses, we are employing people, or we're working self-employed, and in order to be able to sustain all that, we need to be paid on time, and not, to be honest with you, as I said to both Emily and Melissa recently, being apologetic almost about our fees. We do a good job, we provide a really good service, we're de-risking a potential tenancy for a landlord, for an agent, and also for the tenant as well. Why, we're not asking the earth, but I think, the amount we get for a property, and how, when we get paid for a property, all of that needs to be kind of looked at. But we need the right kind of people and the right associations, if that's the way to go, or if not, legislation to be able to help us do that. But hopefully today is one of those first steps towards that.
The risk of being controversial.
No, please do, Ben.
How many people actually, when they first sort of introduce themselves to a new client, whether it be a landlord or an estate agent, how many people actually say, this is our service level agreement? Do you have any questions? Would you like to go through it? Does anyone actually do that? Has anyone ever done that?
Yeah, we always have a soft conversation around standards and principles. And we always try and emphasize that, look, we're not looking to work with every agent in London, in the Southeast, that we try and work with agents that match our values. We try and explain that, we pay our clerks fairly, that we treat our clerks fairly, and that we will make ourselves available to you, but in return, we need the following. and that is clear lines of communication. You know, if jobs are failing or there's problems of access, we need to know before our clerk gets to the property, before our clerks get to the office. And when it comes to payment, that we don't expect to be sending you, you know, statements every 2 weeks for outstanding invoices and not to be hearing back. And I think you're right. I think what you're saying here, Ben, is that, you know, without that clear communication at the outset, you know, you lose the leverage, and it's very hard to you're very hard to sort of dial back from that and crawl back up the ladder and say, well, hold on a minute, you know, you haven't paid us, and we never had that conversation. You know, I think that it's really, really important point.
I am definitely saying that. And I think the other thing is that, and don't take this the wrong way, but the things you discussed there were like access to the property, not having to chase for invoices to be paid. What I didn't, this is just my experience also from being an estate agent when I was sort of interviewing multiple different companies, inventory companies to do a work for us. Not one of them said, these are our payment terms that we will do the job and we expect payment within 14 working days, or it might be on the invoice somewhere, but no one actually ever says, right, this is what we do, this is the service we provide, and this is the payment terms that we expect to be paid by. And do you have a process, Mr. Estate Agent or Mr. Landlord, of do you need a PO being raised? Do you need authorization? Because a lot of these people that we're speaking to when we're calling up and touting for business say, you know, I'm an inventory clerk, or I'm an inventory company, we'd love to do some work for you. How many of us are actually speaking to the person who has authorization? I'm not talking about the person who makes the booking, because invariably the people who make the booking is the estate agent who does the deal, if that makes sense. So that could be little Johnny, who's 19 years old. It's his first job and he has no idea what he's doing. All he knows is that his manager has said, go book an inventory, and he just picks up the phone, gets on Google, who can I find, or there's a company already in place, but he doesn't necessarily know the processes. And the reality is, one of the things that as an estate agent I set up with, ironically, with Trust Inventories, who I now work for, was actually a PO, a purchase order. So ostensibly who the clients were, what the date of the booking was, when I expected to pay the bill, that kind of information. I don't know that I had that with any of the other people I used prior to that point, if that makes sense. Nobody ever said, I expect you to pay by this day, and these are our terms of business. You know, I never saw a terms of business. I never signed a contract. I was never offered one by any inventory company that I ever used prior to Trust Inventories.
I think it's implied. Is it not implied? I mean, I think, you know, you could say, you know, 7 days, 14 days, 13 days for clarity, but we're talking about 6 months. And I think, sure, you know, that you don't need an SLA, you know, or a conversation to know that that's just a failure at some level on the supply side, on the demand side. You know, and I think that at that point, that's the type of issue that I'm referring to here.
Sure.
And look, we have plenty of agents that pay well and are organised. It's not across the board.
I think a lot of it is about the. So I'm sorry, Ben.
No.
Do you want to go?
I think we're all going.
I was just going to say that I think the issue is that without that conversation in advance, without establishing who the right person to be speaking to is, so you know, you might have a conversation when you first have, you know, but create an agreement that you will do inventories for a company or a landlord, more likely or not a company, an estate agent, that you know, anybody can book them. But I think it's just that process, because I think Mark, you mentioned that you have the situations where the payment is lost in no man's land, and I have personally experienced that as the estate agent. And when you get to these big companies, you know, the likes of these big corporates, like, you know, Countrywide or the Connells Group or anyone like that, where ostensibly the estate agents in the branch, they have no control over when things get paid. And that's very much what you described, that issue of the guy in the branch books it, but the guy who makes the payment is, like, I don't know, miles away, never even spoke to the agent in the branch. And like you said, I think it's kind of having that that conversation before any business takes place about what do you require to ensure payments made in a timely manner. And I think you were sort of saying, it's expected, it's kind of, they know they've had the work done, they should pay it before 6 months. I agree. And again, it comes back to that enforceability. If we don't have the conversation and there's nothing in writing, we haven't got an SLA in place, and we're saying we're professional, and I think we all are professionals, but if we don't say, actually, as professionals, we are going to put a service level agreement in place when we start up a relationship with a new business, where everybody signs to say, right, this is the expectation. I do the job then, you pay then, you need a PO number, etc., etc. If we don't put that in place and we just go, oh well, it's expected, well, the truth is, A, it's not going to be enforceable because it's, he said, she said, if it ever went to court. B, like we've already heard from yourself, that the cost of actually recovering that money far outstrips the benefit, plus destroys the working relationship, because you've had to go down that avenue of threatening legal action or bailiffs or whatever. I just kind of think, to a certain degree, as an industry, we kind of almost need to take some responsibility and say, actually, the first step in this process is for us all to say, and I agree, maybe we need a body and we need to unify what that service level agreement should look like. Or, maybe there should be a convention, or we all come together. I have no idea how we'd even start, but but I think, just as individual businesses, if we don't have an idea about our own expectations, if we don't outline those in, on the back of a cigarette packet sort of thing, if we don't say, right, these are the 3 things that are the crux what we do, we do the inventory, you pay us in this time scale, and you let us know what you need in order to make that happen. If we're not doing that, we can't really be, I don't want to say we can't be considered professional, but it starts somewhere, and I think it probably needs to start with us. We need to be the ones to say, actually, this is what our expectations are. And if we were all to do that, and I appreciate not everybody will, because sadly not everyone is of like mind, but if the majority do that, it will become obvious who's more reputable. Who are you going to trust? The person who lays out their expectations in black and white, or the person who goes, yeah, I'll be around next Tuesday with a ladder under my arm, and it's kind of one of those situations. It's, who are you going to trust? The person who's got it ready to, all lined out, ready to go, or the person who kind of wings it?
And that goes back to what I was saying, in the last part of this conversation about contracts with SAs. Is it the fact that we have to act more like a business in order to affect that change? And it's not that we don't act like a business, but I know exactly what you're both saying, Mark and Ben, in as much as that, certainly when I started out, it was literally a case of get a card, I've done a template, I've got a sample report, I'll go around the houses of the agents and everything, etc., and try and get work. And then that's how you build your relationship, as opposed to, hi, I'm here as business with my terms and conditions, this is what I can do, and like I said, have that professional setup. But again, I think historically, from my very limited experience, I've only been in the industry for about 10 years, is that's how it's always been done. You like you said, you do a little bit of training, or you decide, I'll do that because it seems like a really good idea. And I think we need to then pull that back and say, actually, no, we are a very professional service. We come with extreme amount of skills, abilities, understanding, etc. And we then need to make sure, put that into a package, that when we present that to an agent, we say, this is what we can do, this is how we want to do it, this is what benefits we can bring to you, and this is also what we need from you, like you said, Mark, and also Ben, in regards to payment, understanding, dealing with the back office, getting the right information, and having that kind of like conversation constantly with that client to make sure that everybody's getting the best out of the relationship. And when you think about it, it's no different when we sign a contract for any other kind of thing that we do, be it, we buy a house, buy a car. I probably actually sometimes give over more information while I'm buying a kettle from John Lewis than I maybe sometimes, certainly when I first started out, when I went to an agent. And 9 times out of 10, they didn't know who I was, but they were quite willing to give me a set of keys to go do a job, because they just needed the job doing. They weren't really interested in anything else. And then the money came second. So I think there's definitely a benefit there for us to showcase how what we bring to the table, that we are a professional service, get that collective view, get that collective voice, and then start standardizing in some degree, certainly how we actually put ourselves across. We don't necessarily always have to standardise the actual reporting, although I do believe there is elements that should be standardised in regards to health and safety, smoke alarms, that sort of thing. But how we then compile the report sometimes is very individual. So I think there's a lot of space there for us. But certainly from a service point of view, I think to get to that point where people see us as business, we need to act like a business. And I know personally for myself, when I first started out, it was more of a case of, it seemed a good idea. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to affect some change. Wasn't quite sure how I was going to do that, but I needed a starting point. But if we can showcase that better now, I think we'll get that better traction with our clients, and maybe not the SLAs and contracts like you were saying, Mark, you know, that they might be actually restrictive, but at least with an SLA, what you're saying to someone is, this is what I'm going to provide to you, and this is what I expect back from you, i.e. payment on time, being notified when keys aren't available, tenants haven't left, etc., etc. So I think that, you know, if we can do that, and obviously we can't fix that all today, we're already kind of like 15 minutes over, but I think we probably could keep going. But certainly I think that's something that we need to kind of bring back to the table and have a bigger discussion with, you know, more people in the industry to see, you know, what can we do about that? Because I think we said we do deliver a really great service, and I think we can certainly make a bigger difference than we already do in the industry. Right, I think that's a really good point to end if everybody's happy. Has anybody got anything else they'd like to add? No?
No,
Thank you, John. I need to go, but thank you very much for.
No, thank you very
together.
much. And I'm looking forward to taking this much further on from today. So this will be hopefully the first of many conversations. So thank you very much indeed, all of you. I'm really grateful for your input, for your time. Thank you to everybody that's joined us. And we'll get the recording out as quickly as possible. And thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Sean,
Take
take
care.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.